Greetings everyone, my name is Anna, I hope you're all doing well. Today we're going to be discussing House of Earth and Blood, which is the first book in a new series by Sarah J Maas. So let's jump straight into the synopsis for the book so we can get into the review. So basically in this book we're following Bryce Quinlan. She's a half fae character, and her close friend dies straight off the bat in the book, and so she is tasked with helping to find who the murderer is. And so working alongside her we have Hunt Athala. He is a fallen angel. He's kind of enslaved. He's done some things that got him in trouble, and so he is basically at the beck and call of the archangel that he works for. And so I think he was cut a deal where if he also helped Bryce solve the murders before a certain time, then he would gain his freedom. And so essentially it's Bryce and Hunt doing things together, trying to find out who the murderer is. So you have sort of this murder mystery story set inside this fantasy world. This was quite an anticipated book from a lot of people in BookTube and the book community, me as well, because I've read both of her series and I do enjoy them, but I've mentioned it so many times on my channel, I don't particularly enjoy her writing. So I was quite intrigued to see how much it would differ. So we'll discuss it in the review. Now, we'll start off by talking about the world building, because I've seen it mentioned a few times here and there from people as being a point of frustration with the book, because essentially Maas does a lot of info dumping, and it's something that she has done and does tend to do a lot in her other books as well. So you'll meet a character and we'll have, a few lines talking about their backstory, which I think can come across a little bit lazy and quite clunky at times as well. Because personally, when I'm reading a book, especially a fantasy book, I do like it when the world building is sort of woven into the story in a very natural way, because then it doesn't pull you out of the story as much as what Maas does. So we'll meet a character and it will be Bryce walks into a room. Bryce Quinlan, half fae, works at this antiquity store, does this. It's just all very, very clunky writing, and so it can oftentimes take you out of the book as well. I found that with listening to this book, especially in the first few chapters, I had to pay really close attention because so much information was just dumped into the first few chapters of the book that you really had to pay attention in case you missed something, because it all felt very pertinent to the story because it was information being given to us. But I think it's information that could have been very naturally woven into the story, and we could have still gotten that information without it being just dumped all in one go. Now, I've heard it mentioned a few times that this was an urban fantasy, and it's quite interesting to see what people's definitions of that is, because for me an urban fantasy is a fantasy set in our modern times but with supernatural elements. Now, the world that this is set in is not Earth at all, but there are very human products and elements in there. We do have humans, you have mobile phones, you have TVs, you have cars, you have computers, you have internet, but it's not our world. So I guess it's kind of an urban fantasy, like a modern fantasy sort of. But I think the world that was built was one that I think there's a lot can be done with. And one that can be a very interesting world, especially considering how the magic is woven into the everyday lives of people there. Now, Maas also has a bit of a class sifting going on within this book, and that was something that I did actually like, because I think if done really well, it's something that could be a really well built upon plot later on in the story. Now, Bryce, the main character, she is half fae, half human. Humans are pretty much at the bottom of the totem pole in this world, and so we see a lot of the xenophobia that she experiences because of her mixed heritage, and a lot of the sneering from what can be seen as higher classes within this world. I think there is obviously something that a lot of people go through in this world, in our world, and so it was a great touch for Maas to add that within the story. But again, I think it's something that does need to be done well. In terms of the humans within this world, we only get passing comments here and there about them. They don't really feature too much within the story. There is sort of an underlying plot that's going on within the book that isn't really explored at all. There's a bit of a conflict going there, but it doesn't really touch upon the main plot point or the city within the book. But I do think that later on, the fact that she's added the layer of the class system within the world, and she's mentioned a few times about the terse relationship that humans and the Fae have, I do think later on it's going to become something that is a bit of a bigger plot point within the overall series. So it's taken me a while to get to grips with the fact that I do really like Mass's stories, and I think I realised for me the biggest thing is her characters. She writes characters really well that I think sometimes it can be a little bit easy to overlook some of the misgivings that you might have about the rest of the stories. I think Mass is able to build really strong connections between the reader and the characters, and I think she writes very character driven books, which I think is fantastic. But when you have a fantasy book, I think sometimes when you choose to prioritize the characters, it can leave the book feeling a little bit slow in parts. And I think for me, compared to the other books and other series that I have read, it took me a while to get into the story, because if I'm being really honest, I don't really feel like a lot happened, especially with the murder mystery-esque element. We had a lot of confusion within the story up until a certain point, and I think something that Mass is quite guilty of doing is, I've said info dumping, but she also does this thing where characters, especially the antagonists, will sit down and go through their evil plot and tell you this is all that happened, or a lot of the times characters might do something off book and then later on they'll tell you this is how we solve this problem, rather than us going through that with the character. And it kind of happened to a certain degree within this book, but this book was more so, it kind of felt like a layup between the romance between the two main characters, which we didn't actually get a whole lot of really at all within the book. So it kind of left things feeling a little bit up in the air. And so I say all of that to say that really this first story just felt like a lot of setup for the next series, and it's something that we saw happen in the Throne of Glass series, because once you read that first book and then you read the next book within that series, you find out that actually that first book was more like an intro to the world. It didn't really have anything to do with what would be the overarching series and conflict within that book, and that's kind of the feeling I got within this book as well. So yeah, it just felt like a lot of setup for what's going to happen later within the story, because like I said, it just felt like us going to different places. It was Bryce and Hunt becoming friends, building this relationship, trying to solve it, being confused, meeting these new characters that are going to have some sort of importance later. And I don't really feel like the plot really got moving until maybe like the last third of the story, when things really ramped up and certain things that had been subtly dropped earlier in the story sort of then came to a head and were used later on in the book. Now because of that, I was actually probably, up until the last third of the book, I was of the mindset that I probably wasn't going to continue on with this series. I wasn't very impressed, and then we kind of got to the climax of the story, and then Mass's writing really ramped up. Now let's actually get into the writing of this book. I'm sure we've seen enough rant videos to know what people's issues are with her writing. I do not read her books. Like I said, I read it as an audiobook, and so for me there were certain things that stood out a lot and stands out a lot with her writing, and it's her repetitive nature within her books. So she does a lot of, she loosed a breath, and it's almost the flip of she let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. But it's something that when you're listening to the book as an audiobook, it comes up so much that you begin to notice it to the point that it becomes really frustrating. Also, she likes to repeat up, up, up. She swam up, up, up. She jumped up, up, up. He went down, down, down. And it is very annoying to listen to, because it's just this repetitive nature of her writing that just becomes very, very frustrating. Another point that I have in relation to Mass's writing is that she likes to do a lot of tell me rather than show me. For example, Bryce was somebody that we were told constantly she loves to dance. Not once within the book do we ever see her dance. It's almost like the whole thing with Feyre and painting again, where we're constantly told that Feyre misses painting, can't paint anymore, or she thinks this is beautiful, that would make a great painting, but we never really see her ever do it. And so that's the same thing again that happened with Bryce Quinlan, who loves to dance, has always loved to dance, wants to become a professional dancer, but not once do we actually ever see her dance. And so yes, I understand that she went through this trauma and, you know, now she doesn't feel that she can really dance anymore. I get it, but if we're not going to ever see her do it, I don't understand the use in continuously mentioning it after we've mentioned it a few times already. And also she does this thing where we are told, one, how powerful her characters are and how that power can affect the people around them. And I think going back to the point I made with the world building, it would make a lot more sense if we weave that into the story, because a lot of the characters are described as being all powerful. They are the most powerful of their class of Fae. And so it kind of becomes redundant when we're told over and over again and never shown how they can wield that power, because Hunt Athalar has been described in the book as having lightning that is so powerful that he is able to bring down a building. That's great, but how's about we see that in the book? Because there are points where we can see and, you know, that can be demonstrated to us, but we're not actually ever shown that. And so I think when you take the route of describing the power that characters have, like I said, it just makes the power redundant, because I'm not wowed by that. I'm not wowed by being told that this is what this person's power could do. I want to see it in the book, and I think it raises the stakes when, you know, we don't know the lengths or how far their power goes until boom, they explode this building or they destroy or level this land. And I think that's far more effective than just simply saying, you know, they're really super powerful, they can do this. I think it's, again, can be seen as a little bit lazy. I think we've gone to the place where Mas has her formula. She knows what works for her and she knows what her readers are going to like, and it's definitely something that you can recognize within the story. If you're not someone who is really a fan of her writing, I don't really think you're going to enjoy this book particularly, because we still, like I said, we have the info dumping, we have the tell me rather than show me. There is a lot more character building and a lot more of an emphasis on characters and relationships as there are with all of her other books. And you also have the whole maniacal 007 agent-esque Scooby-Doo reveal of the antagonist, giving away the whole plot in a casual conversation, and that's definitely something that we do see in this book. I do roll my eyes when I see it, but it's something that I've come to expect with her writing. And what always usually gets me is the last part of her books, because Mas really knows how to write a build-up, and because she spent so much time building up your relationship with the character, when you get to the climax of the story you are really emotionally invested. And I did like that. An issue I had with some of her other stories was that there was a lot of Deus Ex Machina going on. You write your characters into a corner when they're all powerful but they can't save themselves, and so there's always some sort of external factor that comes, swoops in and saves the day. And I think with this story we definitely got people that helped themselves, which I did like. There was a slight bit of Deus Ex Machina going on in there, but I think overall, because we were shown such a vulnerable side of Bryce, that the climax of the book, I think, was a really good payoff for me. So I really actually genuinely enjoyed the ending of the book, and they always kind of get me emotional. Whilst I spent most of my time eye rolling throughout the whole story, it gets to the end and I'm just like, I'm so sad. So I think overall, did enjoy the story. It definitely was a Sarah J Maas book, there's no doubt about that. And so, like I mentioned, if you did not enjoy her writing, this might not be for you. But if you are a Sarah J Maas fan, this has all the elements that you probably loved from all her other books before. I think it's quite difficult to read this book and not compare it, because there are definite things, like I said, that are very much a template within her stories and how she writes, but it wasn't something that bothered me too much, because the end really hooked me to continue on with the rest of the series. So it's something I'm definitely going to be doing. But I think it was a 3-star read for me. I didn't think it was amazing. I did enjoy reading it. It was just kind of a, that was okay, we'll see what the rest of the series has to hold. That was my review of House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J Maas. If you would like to get a little bit more spoilery, then you can leave a comment down below in the comment section, we can discuss. And don't forget to show the like button some love. If you would like to see more from me, then feel free to subscribe. But that is all from me, and I'll see you guys all in my next video. Bye.